Hi everyone. So I'm a technical architect at UNRVLD, and it's really nice actually to be in London. Probably about 2.5 years since I've got across England. So yeah, should have lots of fun tonight. No, well, maybe. We'll see. But anyway, the title of my talk is basically Optimizely Full Stack Experimentation and basically getting started with it. So it's kind of the steps we want to go through to get going with our first experiment. So what I'd like you to get out of this today, first of all, is just the knowledge and tools to get your first experiment up and running. To get there, I'll do a product overview. I'll then kind of walk through kind of creating that first experiment, and then let's discuss some insights from a real-world experiment that we've done. So first of all, we'll do a product overview. So there's two key things to get our heads around with regard to this. So the first thing is what a feature flag is. Feature flags are quite simple in that they're the opportunity to wrap your code in conditional statements you can turn on and off at will via the Optimizely API. And it's even more powerful with full stack because you can roll your features out to segments of your audience. You don't need to do that big bang, turn it on to everybody. You can gradually roll it out and choose who you want to roll it out to. So it's really powerful, and what it gives you the opportunity to build that into your development processes for more regular release cycles, because you're separating that deployment of code from the turn on of your feature. There's also greater quality control around that and really rapid rollbacks just when something does inevitably go wrong. Experiments then are basically A/B testing variations of the features. So the Optimizely experimentation, so there's a few products there. The first one we'll cover is web A/B testing. So web A/B testing I'm just going to mention. We're not actually going to cover for the rest of this, but I think it's quite an important product and something worth mentioning. It's basically very good for client-side experiments where you can change things into HTML, so you can change things into DOM. You can think of it nearly like Google Tag Manager for injecting JavaScript using the Optimizely SDK. And so for any kind of lightweight, quick experiments that you don't need a deployment for, it's really, really powerful. Now, for the rest of this talk, we're going to talk about full stack and rollout. So full stack is basically server-side experimentation, which is executed in the back end. Typically, you might need to deploy for a new experiment. However, there is a really good API with full stack, so you can do quite clever platform integrations if you kind of design that into your experiments up front. Then Rollout is great for getting started with it because it's a free version of full stack. So Optimizely Rollout. So basically, you can sign up for a free account, and you can get going basically nearly straight away. With Rollouts, you can kind of manage. So straight away, you get to manage some feature flags. You can run an experiment. And then there is a reporting tool to report on the success of these experiments too. Now, because of free plan, there are some limitations. The first one is you can run one active experiment at a time. Bot filtering is turned off, so that can kind of skew your reports a little bit. And there are some limitations around the REST API, but for getting started with and delivering that first experiment, I'd really encourage you to give it a go. So now we move on to the steps to create our first experiment. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up with our own hypothesis for an experiment. And we're going to use the Optimizely Foundation codebase to create that. So anyone not familiar, Optimizely Foundation is a reference architecture that's available on the Optimizely GitHub, and it allows you to, it kind of gives you a reference for kind of all the main product integrations like recommendations, tracking, etc. So it's a really good place to start. Now, so what I've done is I've just set this up, and I'm going to focus on the category page as regards this experiment. So on the category page, by default, you kind of get this sort ordering over here on the left-hand side, where it's ordered by position first and then name, then price. So we're going to create an experiment. And the hypothesis behind our experiment is that if the category pages were ordered by price, where customers would see the cheapest first, instead of position, customers will view more products, average order value will increase, and then overall revenue will increase. So we're going to go about trying to install that now and set that up. So a couple of key concepts before we kind of do a quick product demo of Optimizely. The first thing is audience attributes. Audience attributes allow you to sync data around the current user to Optimizely, so it can be informed around kind of what audience or who this customer is. Effectively then, an audience is built of a group of users who match a specific attribute. So an attribute could be your language. So a group of users who match English, English-speaking users. You can combine attributes. So you could have English-speaking mobile users. So, and you can kind of create these audiences via the product itself. Once you have the attributes set up in code. So it's very powerful. Events then are actions that happen that the current user does. So that can be anything from adding to the cart to creating an order to a page view. It's totally extensible, so you can kind of create your events. They're basically related to how you measure the success of your experiments. We'll get into that a little bit later. And I've touched on flags and experiments, but basically to sum that up, a flag can roll out a feature, and then an experiment is where you A/B test variations of that feature to determine a winner. So I'll do a quick demo of the product itself. So effectively, I'm going to run through a little bit of code here. But before I run through some code, I want to run you through this. I've mentioned audience attributes. Now in the code, we're going to go through these attributes are actually set up by default. So you actually don't really need to do anything to get these few attributes set up, which is mobile device market, user logged in, visitor group. So once these attributes are set up now via here, I can go in and I can add an audience. And then I can just drag it across. So I could drag my market across, and because I'm in London, I'll make that GB. And then I might say I only want to target mobile users. So effectively, I can just do this. Boolean is true. And I could go English mobile users. Save an audience. So it is that quick and easy. So once you kind of design your attributes, it can be really powerful on how you can create this. Your events, which are going to be synchronized through the code, we're going to get these basically out of the box. So this covers everything from page views to add to carts to creating orders. Now if I go into flags, this is where we're going to set up our experiment. And our flag here is what PLP sort order, product listing page sort order is optimal. So you can see we have environments here. I'm going to go to development. Now, when you have a flag, you can add a rule. Now, you can add a rule for targeted delivery, which is you want to manage the rollout of this feature, but not necessarily test it. Or you can do A/B test, which is effectively the experiment we're going to talk about. Now, what you do is you set this up. You can basically now choose your audience who you want to roll this out to. So I've created English mobile users. I could create a new audience here if I wanted, but I'm going to choose this. And then if I think it's a risky experiment, I might only want to roll it out to 28% of sessions that are in there. I can then choose my metrics then from the events that I've created. And the metrics here are basically how I measure the success. So what I've chosen is product. So this is product page views, I think. The order value event that we synchronize to, as well as our order event, which kind of gives you access to the revenue that we synchronize. And then you can create your variations here. So price, position. I could effectively add more if I wanted to. And you can choose then whether that's a 50-50 or how that is distributed. So I'll go back to my slides. So now for setting it up in code. So first of all, there's a really, really useful foundation experiments code base. And this is set up, this was created by David actually. And it's available in the Optimizely GitHub. And it's a project that you effectively drop into your solution. It's agnostic to CMS and commerce and give you some really kind of great integrations, like a lot of the audience attributes I've just talked about, some event tracking, visitor group criteria that are integrated through the APIs too, so you don't necessarily need to deployment. Create your experiment, and then some REST API integrations. There is a couple of steps. David has already documented the steps to configuring the SDK keys, etc. So I've kind of just put a link to that at the bottom of the slide. So what I'd done was I've kind of forked that because I just had a requirement that was slightly different, is I needed to make something quite opinionated for commerce. My goal was to take this and optimize it so I could roll it really quickly across commerce clients. So what I'd done was I added a dependency to the commerce core library, and that effectively kind of gave me the ability then, for example, in the user context, when we're building up the attributes, to use things like markets and use that API, or when we're doing tracking, to use the cart, the iCart, for example. And then I kind of created wrappers around experimentation or tracking and experimentation services as well, just to make it super easy. So I'll do a very, very short code demo. So basically, once you get through this code, all I want to talk, first of all, the attributes. The attributes are basically as simple as building up name-value pairs. So you can see here, because I have that Commerce Core dependency, I could add in basically out of the box. So when you install it, you kind of get that current market attribute getting synchronized. There's another number of other ones, probably taking that data from HTTP context, etc. But it lets me be a little bit more opinionated having that Commerce Core library there. Now, with regard to tracking, what I've done was I just kind of created a wrapping class for a few common tracking services that are here. And with the wrapping class, again, we're using kind of the Commerce Core classes. And I suppose why I wanted to do this was because I wanted to make it super easy to add to my solution. So if I look, for example, in the cart service, I can see that I only need to add one line of code to get my add to cart tracking working. So it was super simple. My steps to get this working was to drop the project in the solution, just add a reference to my web application. One line of code will get my add to cart working, one line of code will get my product page view tracking working, etc. So you can actually install it super, super quick. And what else? Oh, actually, I'll mention the experimentation service. So again, the experimentation service wraps the user context and SDK for deciding the result and the variation of the experiment you're in. It also covers feature flags as well in case you want to roll out a feature instead of an experiment. But effectively, how it works is you get your user context, that gets the user ID. In our code, the user ID is persisted via cookie. It builds that context. It then converts that to an Optimizely SDK and then using an extension method then on the user context to execute the experiment. Now, using these, for example, the experiment we talked about was on the category page. So the code here, I've literally done in 5 lines of code. So what I'm doing here is I'm just checking to see is a sort not set, which indicates that the customer has just arrived on the page. They haven't chosen a sort option via the menu. After that, then we can execute the experiment. You just put the experimentation key in there. Then Optimizely goes away and tell you if it's enabled, because it might not be enabled for this audience, or this customer might not be in the, that percentage. If there's 20%, it might be in the other 80. And it basically gives you back the variation key that you can then use to customize the UI and what the customer then sees on the website. How am I doing, Mark? 5 minutes, okay, I think we can do it. I think we can do it. So this was just me kind of debugging this code. I wasn't actually brave enough to do this live. But effectively, I've just clicked on the category page. It's coming in. It's going to be null. And after that, we're going to step into the experimentation code. Now, when I eventually F10 down, and I come into the side method, the first thing it's going to do inside there, it's going to build up, and then I'm just pointing out the experimentation key. And then it's going to build up this user context. The user context is built up by the ID, which we persist via a cookie. And then the other kind of name value pairs to give context around this current user that we can build the audience from. So if we step through here, I wish I was quicker when I done it. And we look in here, we can see this user object is now an Optimizely SDK object. It has these name value pairs, so it's basically a dictionary as far as code goes. And then the user ID, which persists this user session. Now, when we execute this, it will tell me then if the user is in the experiment or not. So then you have the extension method here. And again, I decided to show it, but here we go. But effectively, when I get back in here, we're going to see that this is enabled because I needed to make it enabled. And then what's happened is the viewModel.sort will set then a variation, and then our UI basically renders that. So the next part, the last part of the presentation, we're going to talk about real-world results. Basically, we ran this experiment in the real world. So one of our top-tier e-commerce clients, it was New Era, actually New Era Cap. So basically, when Optimizely acquired, when Episerver at the time acquired Optimizely, I was kind of quite interested in it. And I kind of checked out David's code base and kind of figured out that it was actually quite easy to get this installed and get something up and running. Karsh is having a great time. And it was quite easy to get something up and running. So kind of just went and rolled out an experiment. And it was actually this experiment on the listing page. And so basically with New Era, there's a bit of debate whether newer products would sell better or best-selling products. At the time it was New In, and the thought process behind that, people interact with this brand to buy their newer products. But then there was also a thought process, but if we sold bestsellers, would that not just sell more, and would that not translate into more revenue? So it was a really little interesting, quick and easy experiment to roll out in a few lines of code. And what we found here was that, you probably can't see it that well there, but New In was generating more revenue. And the reason it was generating more revenue because the average order value was higher when people were seeing newer products first. So what we're finding was product page views were the same. The number of orders are relatively the same. But effectively, we were finding that average order value was quicker or was better for New In. And that was quite interesting, but it was actually quite minimalistic. It wasn't like a big winner. So we're thinking, do we have a winner or not? That's actually quite debatable. What was really interesting, though, is because when you see the report, you can actually filter down. So you can filter down by any of the attributes we set up before. So I can filter by market. And when we dug into the report by market, we found that a market, for example, Germany, very heavily favoured bestsellers, while UK was kind of New In, but not, kind of on the fence. Spain, for example, was kind of heavy in New In. But effectively, what that told us was that our strategy needs to we need more experiments, and we need to look at our strategy not as what is the best sort order for the PLP, but we need to optimize everything per market. We have to look at our algorithms, our personalization through content, through everything basically, and we need to start thinking on a per market basis, and actually using full stack as part of our, I suppose, main part of our strategy going forward gives us that power to create experiments and create variations of these experiments and roll them out across different markets. So I'll quickly wrap up. So just to wrap up, I'd say, whether you're an architect, developer, project manager, just to know that it's easy to get started. And I'd really recommend, just using rollouts. You don't need to go to your client and say there's some expensive costs in getting started. It's free. You get to do that first experiment. The time to install it using the starters will probably take a couple of days. It probably a bit more, maybe an extra day, because you will want to read up on the documentation and get your head around it. But quite low investment in that. So just use rollouts. Add foundation experiments as a project. Just start simple. There's no need to try and design the perfect experiment. Just start something simple. And then I think once you start to use it, you'll find that the product does add value to your strategy going forward. The insights you get from experiments can inform strategic decisions around features you may invest heavily in going forward. You can kind of do a little trial of them or try and figure a way of doing an MVP. As well as optimize performance of existing things. For example, your category page algorithms. And experiments, I suppose, what we found is that it inspired kind of more granular experiments. So we started with a big one. Let's see what it's like for everybody. Now we know we need different experiments for each market in this little feature alone. So once you extend that across the rest of your strategy and your features, I think, it's quite an exciting space. And I think there's huge potential in the way we go forward. And that is me. So thank you.
When it comes to defining experiments, is there any recommendations you would make to define those? So how did you just come up with the sort by experiment and things like that?
The sort by was effectively just me. It was my idea because I wanted something simple and something to go to the client with. Now, when it comes to defining an experimentation program, we're working through that with the Optimizely team. So the Optimizely full stack have a really good onboarding process, and they talk you through basically that. And that whole process goes from ideation through to development through analysis. And so you kind of get into a consistent kind of model of creating experiments, results, and into the next ideation of the next ones. But this particular one was just me. But now we're actually defining a whole program. And that program has, it has architects, it has data analysts, business analysts, it has a client involved, as well as the development team. And, everyone is quite excited around how it affects the way we work going forward.
I think that may have been a targeted question. It's a very good one if it wasn't. Anybody else? I did see another hand. Joey.
Yeah, were there any capabilities that you maybe didn't hear from us at Optimizely that once you got into it, you're like surprised by or delighted by, or just something that you found there's more valuable that we maybe don't talk about as much? Obviously, we talk quite broadly sometimes about experimentation as a whole.
Exactly, yeah. I think the rollout capabilities are really, really powerful. And I think we talk about experimentation, but the fact is that if you build Rollout into your development process, it has the opportunity to actually change the way companies do things. Because what it is going to do is going to separate that the big bang deployment from actually turning on features. Because often we kind of come up with features and the QA team will have to do it. We go out and there's a whole bang of QA teams trying to test everything. But effectively, you could roll it out and you could turn that feature on for your QA team. So they're effectively testing it in the live environment. And then you have that opportunity then to roll out to individual audiences depending on how it is. So I think that's probably a feature that could be bigged up an awful lot more. Because it can be kind of quite revolutionary. Now, the one thing I was kind of concerned about initially was performance. I was going, are we going to be making all these API calls? That could be performant. But effectively, it doesn't make the API calls. So I won't go into the background, but it doesn't actually make the API calls, so you don't have to worry about performance, as long as you set it up properly, obviously.
One more.
Are you the clients you're working on,
or maybe your client side? Obviously, we're doing the rollout to 28% of the traffic.
Yeah.
You're reducing your statistical power. Are you working with clients that have got a lot of traffic, or you're not looking for a statistically valid outcome from your results?
Yeah, well, basically, we're working with clients with a lot of traffic. So what we done was, when we done the PIP one, we kind of decided to roll it out for 20% of the audience, but to keep that active over a longer period of time. So basically, when you roll an experiment out, you have the choice, and the choice is how soon. They have this fancy term called statistical significance. So when you kind of get enough data to be confident in the result. And if you want to roll out to 100% of the audience, you're going to get there much quicker. So then you have that strategic decision. And the good thing about it is you don't need to make that time of development. You just can come in here and configure that at the time you're turning it on. So you can get things through development really quick while you're actually figuring that puzzle out. But in our case, we went with 20% of the audience over a longer period of time so that we could begin to measure. In case it just totally dropped off, for example, we could turn the experiment off very quick and we wouldn't see a kind of big monthly drop or something.
what kind of time period are you looking at?
We done about 8 weeks for our experiment. We put there was a couple of 100,000 sessions gone through at the time. And I was with 20%. So we had a high traffic, high volume site, but that's kind of how we ran at that particular time. At that point, we felt we had the data. But then again, you can keep that live because product sets change as well. So, for example, there might be a very good set of newer products that might come out, and at that point you might want to do it. So it's and the great thing about it is you don't need to decide that until the moment in time, because you can just literally come in here, change something and press save.